Welcome to the deep dive. Today you've brought us something that I think is, well, it really is delicious. It's a conversation between Yotam Ottolenghi, the really celebrated chef and cookbook author,
Mm.
and the BBC's Katty Kay.
Yeah.
And I think we should, we're going to delve into his journey, right? We're
Yeah.
going to try to understand what makes his food and his whole philosophy so compelling,
Mm.
and just why his approach to cooking has resonated with so many people.
Absolutely. I think whether, you love being in the kitchen yourself, or you're someone who's just fascinated by all the cultural threads that are kind of woven through food, or you just want to know more about this guy and how he's become such a culinary, icon. I think this deep dive into Ottolenghi is going to be so interesting. And
Yeah.
we'll be focusing on his interview with Katty Kay, where he talks about, his path from academics to the kitchen, how his cooking style developed, and really how important his cookbooks became.
Okay, so let's unpack it all, starting with a beginning that may seem, well, a little unlikely, right? I mean, he starts out, in the academic world of philosophy, and that seems pretty far away from the vibrant kitchens that we now associate with him.
And what's really fascinating is how he kind of contrasts the two. He talks about how his philosophical pursuits, and especially like conversations around these complex topics, like trying to figure out the meaning of photography, is very esoteric is the word he uses.
Yeah.
Almost isolating. Like only a select few people were really engaging in those kinds of discussions and debates. So it does make you think, right? Like, did that disconnect between the kind of intellectual abstract world and the tangible shared experience of food, did that play a role in him ultimately moving toward the kitchen?
Oh, that's interesting.
Maybe grappling with the meaning of images, in that kind of theoretical sense, made him appreciate the immediate sensory impact of food even more. I don't know, just a thought.
Well, and think about, how different that whole scene is,
Yeah.
right? From a kitchen. He talks about the kitchen as a space. It's just full of curiosity and play.
Yeah.
He's watching his own kids. They got a 9 and 11-year-old, and
Yeah.
he's watching them just make omelets, right?
Right.
And he even coined the term, I love this, cooking is play.
Yeah.
It really makes you think about different ways we can learn and engage with things.
Right.
What nourishes us in different ways.
Right. And if we zoom out a little, it kind of suggests that for Ottolenghi, maybe the act of creating food
Mhm.
and that immediate shared experience of actually eating offered a more direct, maybe even more satisfying kind of engagement than he was finding in philosophy. It makes me think, what are those activities for all of us that really spark our curiosity and make us feel like we're kind of playing and exploring?
Hmm.
It's a good question.
It really is. And it's interesting, too, he talks about his parents, right?
Mhm.
Both really involved in education. His dad was a chemistry professor at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and his mother was a head teacher.
Yeah.
But beyond those academic roles,
Yeah.
right? They were good cooks.
Right.
It says that. And his father, because he had a little more flexibility in his schedule, he often took the lead in the kitchen.
Right.
So clearly food was really woven into the fabric of his family life.
Yeah, and I think that's important because it shows that, his decision to kind of move into the culinary world wasn't this complete, like leap into the unknown.
Mm.
There was already this foundation there, right? This really deep familiarity with food and cooking. But he does mention this kind of quiet expectation that he was supposed to follow a more academic path, not like a strong pressure or anything, but this unspoken sense that that's what he was going to do.
Which I guess, makes his divergence, his sort of breaking away from that all the more interesting.
Yeah.
So he goes from this background that's so steeped in abstract thought, right,
Yeah.
to this incredibly sensory and communal world of food.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the evolution of his culinary philosophy.
Yeah.
One of the key elements that really stands out is this focus on seemingly simple ingredients,
Right.
and this idea of food being such a powerful way to connect people,
Right.
which has really resonated with home cooks.
Yeah, and what's really interesting to me is how his influence spread. It's not just the restaurants. He says, and I love this quote. He says, "The publishing arm of Ottolenghi became the dog wagging the tail."
Yeah.
So his ideas and recipes, through his cookbooks, they've reached so many more people.
Right.
And you could argue maybe they've even become more central to his impact,
And his cookbook from 2018, Simple,
Yeah.
it feels like a turning point in that regard. It's not like he dumbed down his approach or anything. It was more like he distilled his techniques, all those amazing flavors into something that was actually achievable for the everyday cook.
Yeah, it's like he was really thinking about, what does it actually mean to cook this recipe at home in a real kitchen,
Yeah.
When do people actually have time to cook? How much effort are they really going to put in?
Yeah.
He was thinking about, would people actually cook this food or just admire it? What do you think about simple? What were those techniques or flavors that made it feel so doable? Maybe using ingredients that were easier to find, or maybe simplifying some of those multi-step processes. What do you think?
It's a great question. I think maybe part of it was demystifying some of the ingredients.
Yeah.
He uses some things that maybe seem a little exotic at first.
Yeah.
And he showed people how to incorporate those into everyday meals.
Yeah.
And maybe shifting a bit to techniques that felt less intimidating.
Yeah.
Less scary.
Right.
And he also had this really keen observation. I thought this was so smart. He said that, home-style cooking and family-style serving are way more popular now than they used to be.
Interesting.
And he attributes that partly to, the cost of living, obviously.
Yeah.
But also, and really powerfully, I think, to the experience of COVID, right?
Yeah.
Which really highlighted how comforting and even healing it can be to prepare food and enjoy it at home.
And I think that's such a big part of it, right? The pandemic made so many of us really stop and think about our relationship with food,
Yeah.
It became more than just fuel or something we do on a special occasion at a restaurant. It became this source of comfort, right? And a way for people to connect in their homes.
Yeah.
And even this outlet for creativity during those long periods of isolation. So, yeah, I think that collective experience really did amplify how appealing Ottolenghi's, emphasis on home-style cooking really was.
And it's led to this really fascinating phenomenon, right?
Mm.
Where Ottolenghi has almost become an adjective.
Like a style.
Yeah. People talk about dishes being very Ottolenghi.
Mm-hmm.
And you immediately think of, vibrant colors and fresh vegetables.
Yeah.
And all those incredible flavors that he often achieves with what seem like simple ingredients and techniques.
Right. It's a whole shorthand for this style.
It really is. And what's interesting, I think, is how humble he is about all of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't dwell on that at all. He quickly brings the conversation back to his core intention,
Right.
which is to make cooking this comforting and truly enjoyable experience.
Yeah.
Something that alleviates anxiety instead of creating it.
Yeah. That's so key.
It really speaks volumes about his philosophy.
I mean, really does.
Which leads perfectly into our next key point, right? This idea of food as a universal language and a deep source of comfort. He really believes, he says, food is a language that everybody understands.
Yeah.
There's this, this fundamental shared human experience around eating and being nourished.
Absolutely. It goes beyond cultures and languages,
Yeah.
A good meal, a thoughtfully prepared meal, it can really bring people together, create understanding, sometimes even better than words can.
Right.
And his focus on cooking being healing rather than routine, that's so important. I mean, he says it so simply, food really is one of those activities that shouldn't induce anxiety, and he's right.
That's so true.
And that's so refreshing, in a world where food can be so stressful.
Yeah, it really is.
Thinking about diets or trying to figure out complicated recipes or just feeling like you have to get dinner on the table after a crazy day,
Right, exactly.
He's saying, let's get back to basics. Let's enjoy it. Let's keep it simple.
Yeah. Yeah, he's really advocating for that, I think.
He is. He's saying, we all need to be nourished physically and emotionally and preparing and sharing food. That's how we do it in a good way, in a positive way, without all the stress.
What about you? What really resonates with you about this idea of food as a universal language, this source of comfort? Have you felt that?
It makes me think about all the times I've shared meals with people from different backgrounds,
Yeah.
and how the food itself became this common ground,
Yeah.
this way to connect, even if we didn't speak the same language perfectly,
It's so true. So I guess to kind of sum up our deep dive, we've gone on this really interesting journey with Ottolenghi, right?
Yeah.
From this abstract world of philosophy to this really tangible and I think universally understood language of food.
Yeah, and it seems like his main message is all about embracing simplicity in the kitchen.
Right.
About using food to connect with people, to create genuine connection.
Yeah.
And to rediscover how joyful cooking can be, you know?
I hope this exploration has given you, our listener, some real food for thought.
Yeah, I hope so.
Maybe it inspires you to try a new recipe, something that seems deceptively simple,
Oh, yeah.
Or maybe it encourages you to be a little more relaxed and playful in your own kitchen.
Right, have fun with it.
Yeah, or just, maybe you just have a deeper appreciation for how powerful a shared meal can be.
Yeah. It's
How it
true.
can bring us all together. And finally, think about this, right? Ottolenghi, he went from analyzing the meaning of images to creating, meaningful sensory experiences through food.
It's an interesting shift. Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it makes you think about the different languages we all choose to engage with, the ways we express ourselves,
Right.
whether it's academic or artistic or culinary or anything else.
Yeah.
How do those chosen languages shape the connections we make, the impact we have on the world?
It's a great question.
It really is. What language really resonates with you?
Yeah.
How does it help you connect with others? That's something to think about, something to savor. Until our next deep dive.
Absolutely.